All right, hello, rockers and rollers. It's the Meister from Brews and Tunes. Cheers.
Cheers.
I am absolutely thrilled today. I am chatting with the one and only Mr. Chris P. James, the indelible Mr. Chris P. James, of course, of the Burrito Brothers, as well as many other bands. Chris, thank you so much for joining me. How you doing, sir?
Oh, I'm doing fine. Thank you, Victor, for having me. It's good to be here.
Excellent. Yeah, well, one, I mean, I was really excited when your PR guy reached out to me and mentioned that, you were up for an interview and he sent me some music and I was just stoked because, I've always loved the Flying Burrito Brothers and the legacy of that band and the latest album, the Burrito Brothers, your band, you guys put out an album just fairly recently.
Yeah,
Here in 2023, end of 2023, if I got my dates right. I'm
right.
terrible at dates. The album together, and I have to tell you, I love this album. I adore this album. It's so fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
I
it's
feel a whole lot went into it. We've really put our heart and soul into it, and there's a story that maybe I should wait a little bit since we're just starting the interview about how our our dear friend Bob Hatter, the guitar player, he died during the making of it. He
oh wow,
contracted
yeah.
cancer, and we lost him. And so there was a lot. It was a long path to getting this one completed, but it was a beautiful thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's such a great album. What I love about it, you and I were chatting before the interview is the thing I really love about the sound now of the Burrito Brothers is that, obviously um, there's the nod, the acknowledgement, the legacy, to the legacy of the Flying Burrito Brothers, but you guys have made this your own. It's your music. You're not trying to be the Flying Burrito Brothers. It's a nod to that band and to the legacy of Graham Parsons, but you have your own sound and it's just so richly textured and just such a wonderful album. I mean, from start to finish, from Miss Misery all the way to and I love Miss Misery. I can't decide what my favorite song is. It might be Miss Misery or it might be the final song, The History Suite, which is just absolutely fantastic. Um,
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate the description. That's how we think of ourselves. That we're we're most certainly attached to the legacy and honor it, and it should be evident in what we play. I think we're coming from that perspective, but we also aren't copycatting. We really don't want to play or record like we think, this is what it's supposed to sound, or we're trying to be Graham Parsons or something. It's just feeling that we're the right people for the job, or we wouldn't be in it, because there's this long path that this group has trotted, and the people who are in it now are in it just like everyone who ever was. There's never been an audition for the Burrito Brothers. It's always been when someone leaves or passes away, or is no longer in the group, the next guy is somebody who the rest of the nucleus of the group knows is the right person to bring in. There's always somebody sort of waiting in the wings. I feel strongly that I was that guy 15 years ago. I never auditioned. I had played with the group on various occasions as a substitute, and even sang some vocal on one of the albums, and no, on two or three of them, and played some live dates here and there. And it just kind of was, like I call it, waiting in the wings, sort of. And so we've got this sense that we know how to make good recordings of the good songs we choose, and that we are pretty stamped, identifiable as the Burrito Brothers, with the featured lead instrument being the pedal steel guitar, which started from day one. That was with Sneaky Pete Kleino on Gilded Palace of Sin. And the idea of the Burrito Brothers not having a pedal steel guitar just isn't in the equation.
right.
And the guy we've got now is so ideal. It's mind blowing. He's so brilliant. Tony Paoletta is absolutely sensational on pedal
Oh,
steel
yeah.
guitar, world class.
Yeah. That guy's a monster. He's
Yeah.
really incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody in the band. I mean, there's so much talent,
Thank you.
oozing from. I mean, you guys have more talent in your pinky fingers than I will ever have ever doing anything, I think. Um, I mean, and you can hear. I mean, from the opening notes of like Miss Misery, it's like as soon as that starts, like, oh wow, this is the real deal. Like, you
That's cool. There's a story with Miss Misery. That was Bob Hatter and I wrote that together. Uh, gosh, I think it was 15 years ago or something,
oh,
approximately. And we demoed it. And at that time, it had slightly different words, and we called it Meet Miss Misery. And we've changed the name to MS period Misery. And with the passing of, we lost Bob Hatter during the making of this Together album. He got cancer. It was a return of it. He had been a cancer survivor and seemed to have beat it for a good 10 years or more. But when it came back, he wasn't able to get out of that. And we had already gotten together and decided on the songs for this album, which we were saying we decided on our next album. And we had, what we do is almost always make some form of demo of each song that's going to be on the album that we bring into the studio for the day we record it for a master as a guide. And the sometimes the demos are old like that. It's just like we're all old enough guys and been doing it for so long and been good at it for so long, if I dare say so,
yeah.
that there's a lot of good demos in our sort of personal libraries and stuff, and we kind of dig through that. We don't have to write everything from scratch each time out. We obviously do some of that because it's part of the artistic process. But in this case, the demo was an older one, but Bob played sensational guitar on it. And as we were losing him and he was unable to come into the studio to make the master recordings, we isolated his guitar from the original demo and built the whole new Ms. Misery track with that old guitar part of Bob's in order to have a way to include him on the album. And there's one other example of that. I Find Love was an older recording that he and Tony made. They called it Screaming Bald Ego. And we sweetened it up. I added background vocals and a little bit of keyboard, and we just kind of made it a newer recording. So that way we had, in fact, a lead vocal from Bob Hatter, and we definitely dedicated the album to him.
Nice.
But Steve Allen came in to replace him, came in his chair, so to speak, and had the same skill set. What we were doing with Bob was letting Bob play the bass, and then we got Pete on drums, Tony on pedal steel, me on keyboards, and the guitar player also played the bass. Well, Steve did that too. Oh. And before Steve got started recording with us, he made it clear that he would like to speak with Bob and essentially get Bob's blessing. Is it okay with Bob? If I do this, I'll feel funny if I don't get his okay. And then Bob, of course, I mean, it makes all the sense in the world that Bob was all for it because this was the album we had started. I've said many times that even with Steve Allen completing it in Bob's place, it's still the same album we would have made had Bob lived, had he survived that cancer. So it's a strange sort of crossover of moving from Bob Hatter to Steve Allen, but it seemed pretty seamless and smooth transition. And Steve has made it clear he's happy to continue with us, whatever we're going to do from here on out.
Nice. Oh, that's good. That's great. I love the fact that Bob, that you isolated his tracks. That's beautiful. I think that's really amazing. That's a great, appreciation of his legacy. And That's really cool that he was included on the album and more than one song. I think that
Yeah.
that's really cool. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, rest in power to Bob. So
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's really cool. Um, so you've been in the band. You said like 15 years. Like so, yeah, around 2009, I guess.
2009. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how did that come about? How did you join the band? I know you said you'd mentioned you'd done vocals previously with
Yeah.
the previous
Well, the
incarnation of the
actual
band.
story was if you look up the Flying Burrito Brothers on Wikipedia, you'll find entries that go all the way from 1968 or 9 to present day. And it lists the different variations of the group's name, all as still being this group, all under the original heading. It's like, it's always been my experience, my memory, that whenever I saw the group called the Burrito Brothers or Burrito Deluxe or just the Burritos or of course the Flying Burrito Brothers, I just thought it was all the same group. From the get-go, you could look at a Rolling Stone interview or review of their earliest albums and you'll see spots in there where they just simply refer to them as the Burritos or the Burrito Brothers, even when the name was technically the Flying Burrito Brothers.
Yeah.
So to make that long story kind of come around to what you just asked, around 2009, the Burrito Deluxe version that had been going, I think, about 8 years, and actually started that decade with Sneaky Pete on some of it. They folded, they closed up shop, and not even a year passed when my brother Fred James is a producer, and he's gotten a lot of European contacts. His niche is mostly older Black blues artists, and he found a bunch of them here in Nashville starting about 30, maybe even 40 years ago, and made a little niche for himself, had a good couple decades of finding lots of older Black R&B and blues artists label deals in Europe. And so one of his contacts said they were starting an Americana style label. It was oh gosh, because our label's name is SFM, I always forget the name of this label because it was S, two more letters. It was some, oh well, anyway, this contact wanted a branch. They were blues up to that point, and they wanted to branch out into getting some Americana style, legacy type American country rock groups, for lack of a better genre name, and asked my brother Fred, what about the Burrito Brothers? And he knew, he was aware that the Burrito Deluxe gang had kind of folded up shop. And he said, but you know, this just is not without precedent, that why couldn't yet another version of them start up? It never, you know, this has happened many times in the past. Some lineup kind of thought they were calling it a day, and remnants of it and some new guys who fit perfectly carried on. And just like this, in each case in the past, it was that some label or agent, some people were interested in promoting it and having it. And my brother Fred answered that his brother Chris, being me, really kind of knew all those guys, or had a good start at it, and much more than he did. And so they kind of farmed it out to me. They put this record label exec in touch with me, which was heady stuff, because here I was finally getting the dream come true of joining the band. But suddenly I'm kind of the band leader. That's tricky. I just don't have that kind of ego. I mean, I'm sure anybody who's bold enough to get up and want to present themselves like I do, like we do, has ego, but that doesn't necessarily have to be an ego trip or something bad.
Right.
And so I just want to be a band member. I don't want to act like I'm the big leader. And But the thing was, most people don't want it at all. It's sort of the old, it's a dirty job, somebody's got to do it. And I thought,
Yeah.
well, if this is my entry, I'll take it and I'll try to be as decent and humble as I can. So they directed me to uh, attain the trademark rights. This is something I'd never done before. I've never acquired trademark rights to a group, but I don't think a lot of people thought along those lines until probably this millennium. It's more common, but back in the older days, people just, I bet you most of the groups we love didn't trademark their name. They just did it. And so it was available, and I was able to show that that we had enough of the connection to the original group that everybody involved had played with them at some time, or like Walter Egan was one of the guys, and he was friends with Graham Parsons and wrote Hearts on Fire that Graham Parsons recorded with Emmylou Harris, and the connection was good enough. And the label was dealing with me like, I want to know who you've got in mind for this group, and we're going to okay them or deny. And luckily it all went through okay. And also, finally, of course, you got to make a pretty good album or they're going to turn it down.
Right.
Those were the three stipulations. They wanted to okay the choices of personnel in the band, and make sure that you got the trademark rights, or else that was a deal breaker. And then finally, you better make a good album, and we passed on those three and went from there.
Nice. And
Yeah.
now 5 albums later,
Yeah.
15 years later, you guys are going strong, which is
Yeah. It seems like it's better. It seems like it's sort of navigated some rough waters. Like I don't want to name any names because I don't think anybody's a big big bad person, or did anything horribly wrong. But it seems like having to get guys whose name recognition and resume fit the old Burritos the best of who I knew, wasn't necessarily the ideal chemistry. It's like everybody's kind of got their own bags, maybe, or the different points of view don't completely mesh and stuff. And we've sort of navigated through. It's weird. I got to look out for at this point in time, far more than when I first entered the band, I am far more the leader. It kind of hinges more on me than the other guys. I'm the one to instigate the like they said Paul always did with the Beatles. Come on, boys, let's make an album.
yeah.
that stuff, and instigate the writing stuff. And then I'm the principal lead vocalist. But I promise you, that was not me in some sort of power play. That was more a case of the rest of the band preferred that direction. And that's actually why we stay as just a 4-piece, because it's so ideal for recording. The old too many chefs, too many cooks kind of spoil the broth. Yeah. And the 4 of us can really just see eye to eye, be absolutely on the same page. And then for Steve and Bob before him to just put the bass part on once we've got a track up and going is ideal, as opposed to the idea of finding one more personality, because we really feel if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah. But I also think it's getting close to time to I wouldn't say fix it, but I'd say make another change. This group's the idea of this group changing so many times over the years, I do not see as a negative. It's a plus. It's really cool, because each time there's a new chemistry, each time there's a new reinvention of the group, there's this sense, this kind of need to prove it, to establish once again that we're the right guys for this job, and we want to show you what we got. There's all this reinvigoration that happens over and over again. Whereas most bands with a name that's lasted this long are more of a version of a group that plays shows doing their famous songs from long ago.
Yeah.
And in this case, it's a different animal. There kind of aren't that many. I suppose you could make a case for there being some pretty darn famous old Burrito Brothers songs, but none of them were huge hits. They never had a top 10 hit.
Yeah.
Far from ever anything like a number one or anything. They didn't have hits. There was a brief period in the early 80s where they got onto the country charts in the lower realms. And actually those albums are not among my favorite past Burrito Brothers albums because it sounds so much like that's what they were trying to do.
Right.
Those little country ditties. Not that they were ever bad. I believe the Burrito Brothers, Flying Burrito Brothers, Burrito Deluxe, every version was always very good band, really top-notch musicianship. But the real legacy was established during the era where albums were what mattered, you know, where people bought albums.
Yeah, agreed. And it seems like, especially that original lineup, that original band, they were such an anomaly at that time.
Oh, yeah.
1968, it's, especially, like with Hillman and Graham Parsons coming from the Byrds. And, they did start that, with Sweetheart of the Rodeo, that sound, that country,
absolutely,
Americana. But I mean, I think it wasn't necessarily really well received, especially from hippies at that time. They were kind of like, what in the hell is this? And I think, it was such an anomaly. And I mean, they, they were, they had popularity for sure. But yeah, like you said, they weren't a hit making band.
They were,
and it was fairly short-lived too. That original lineup was very short-lived.
Very short-lived. Yeah, 2 albums with Graham, and each one of them had slightly different personnel. In fact, strangely, there's never been 2 albums in a row by any version by the group for all 55 years. There's never been 2 albums in a row with exactly the same personnel. We may be the first, because our plan for our next album is to do it with this group. Although, well, no, because we list Bob Hatter as being a member here, even though we feel like Steve Allen was in the band with us. So I guess that strange phenomenon of always some little difference in personnel continues to this day. It's interesting. I'm glad you mentioned Sweetheart of the Rodeo, because that's the mothership. That's I put on the album art. I don't know if you
great album cover, by the way.
And like the artist Warren Ells, who did that for us, I asked him how we could incorporate it. Is there any way to make that rodeo girl from the cover of Sweetheart of the Rodeo into a spaceship? Because it would be so cool to have that palace, that this thing.
Oh yeah,
Have that as a landing module, like we're taking it from the desert into space. And he came up with the idea, how the World War II fighter pilots had the pretty women on the side. They had it, and he thought of using it that way, and he put the girl from the cover of Sweetheart of the Rodeo onto the spacecraft. And the concept is that Sweetheart of the Rodeo is the mothership, because that's the one and only Byrds album that Graham Parsons was on. And he, right after making that album, got Chris Hillman to join him in leaving the Byrds and starting their group, the Flying Burrito Brothers, which is so obviously a spin-off of the Byrds. And even more so when Michael Clark becomes their drummer.
Oh yeah, right.
The joke ran around back in those days. There were more Byrds in the Burrito Brothers than there were in the Byrds, and so that's sort of an inside little bit of I don't know if you call it a joke, but it's an inside thing for those who know that history.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to ask you about that. I thought that was really, when I saw the album cover, I'm like, oh, it's got the Sweetheart of the Rodeo. So cool. Yeah, I thought that was great, and I love the fact, yeah, like you said, like the pinup girls on the planes from the World War II. Yeah, that's brilliant. That's really cool.
I
That's
love the artwork. It's the back cover was really special too. That's got, see, the front has the landing module leaving the mothership. And if you look closely, this is more of a tortilla than a planet. It's
yeah.
planet burrito. But on the back cover, um, our representative in England, Bob Boiling, who, by the way, has the initials BB, just like the Burrito Brothers, Bob
Nice.
Boiling, uh, got us a record deal with SFM Records. God, he's been so helpful to us, and they have too. Brian Adams, uh, that SFM Records distributes us around the world, and we're really grateful to them. And Robin Sellers too at that label. But uh, I just forgot what I was onto for a second there.
The back cover, the
Oh yeah, the back cover, of course. Yes. um, uh, Bob Boiling's wife, Jo Boiling, is a really fine artist. She painted that. This is not graphic art
oh wow.
like the usual thing, like this is, in fact, you know. Um, there is an actual original of that painting, and it's oil on canvas, and uh, she just offered to do it, and we were thrilled. It was so cool that you know, to do that for us. What a compliment! How sweet.
Yeah, that's great. That's
Yeah.
really cool. I did not know that. That's great. I love that. Um, kind of circling back a little bit, you talked a little bit about when you were talking about kind of being the band leader and kind of the structure of the band and creating songs. And so I wanted to delve into that a little bit more in terms of songwriting. Kind of what's the songwriting process for you guys? Does it start with you? Does it start with a riff? Yeah.
It seems to, since it's, you know, like I pointed out, I'm the band leader, and the other guys, this is not the only uh, groups or artists or people they play with. They live here in Nashville, and they're seasoned pros who get called for lots and lots of sessions and live work and stuff. I'm thrilled that they're always ready and happy and make time for the Burrito Brothers, but obviously they do plenty of other stuff. So they're fine with kind of just responding to my lead, so to speak. And so probably the lion's share, like maybe 70% or somewhere around there of the songwriting originates with me, but I contact them and say, I've got this idea that goes, you know, I've got it started, and I'd like to get together with, and usually it's not all of them. You know, we don't write as a collective four guys. We've done that on some occasions, and it's really cool. But it's kind of also cool to just have the one of them who seems the most like the right guy for this one, you know. And uh, so I'll have some sort of seed started, and often I've gotten together, well, especially in the making of Together, while Bob Hatter was not available, I got together with both Pete and Tony and wrote some things. And I've written with Steve Allen. We've written collectively. And another thing that really makes us not have any issue at all with what people call writer's block is, I might have alluded to it earlier, that we've been at this so long, we've got lots of previous work. My interest in recording songs was how I started in music from way back when. I
Oh, wow.
always wanted to be a singing member of a band, you know, and write tunes and stuff. It wasn't so much, I just want to be a keyboard player, I hope somebody hires me, you know. And so with that point of view, I've got a whole bunch of demos and things I've recorded through the years that have never seen any real success, that I believe are worthy of it. And in most of the cases now, all these years down the road, when I go through, well, first I probably first just think of one of them. It just comes back to mind and kind of go, oh, that would be a good one to rework. But when I pull out some old demo, my concept nowadays is not to copy it. It's not to think that it's absolutely necessarily finished way back when. It's to use it and see what we could do with it now. Maybe a bunch of words need to be changed. Maybe it needs a whole other approach. But it's usually, nice to have something like that as a starting point. You're often running on writing a song.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. That's
Yeah.
yeah, that's brilliant. That's cool. And it's got to be nice to have that kind of back catalog of demos and
Yeah.
ideas, and so you're not, hard pressed for like, especially like, okay, we're working on an album. What should I do? What's the
Yeah.
next
Anybody
song?
got any ideas?
Yeah.
I don't think it's funny. We don't seem to ever have that issue. It's not like, well, we got to come up with some material. There's always plenty of that.
Do you as a side, I'm not a musician, but I find musicianship uh you know um in a lot of ways very heroic for me. I love the arts, and I love music, so I find songwriting, I think, is brilliant. I think it's amazing, an amazing skill and craft. So I'm always fascinated by that process. Do you and maybe it's probably different all the time. Are you the type of person that sits down and writes a song, or are you kind of just walking around and melodies are popping in your head all the time? And
It's a little closer to the latter.
okay.
I walk to try to get my regular exercise. And often when I'm walking, there'll be some idea that pops in mind. I also am pretty good about jotting down if something during the course of the day, hear it on TV or I don't know for whatever reason something jogs a feeling of, boy, that's worth remembering that line. Might be a good song title, or even an idea of what the storyline of a song title could be. I'll jot that down, and then a lot of times while walking, just kind of get an idea, get something starts going through the head, and I try to hold on to it. And when I get back, I sing it into a little demo recorder so that I can remember it. And a lot of them go that way. Although, man, for this whole time I've been in the Burrito Brothers, we always wrote a lot more material than the amount of albums we put out. I've got like a collection of songs I've written with Walter Egan. I've got songs I've written with Soup Granda. I've got some songs I wrote with my brother Fred, Rick Lano, Ron Gilbo, and then of course the guys who are currently in the band. We have some
Wow.
history together, and so we usually, when it's time to make an album, we've got a few new ideas that we're real fired up with, but in order to come up with material to fill a whole album, a lot of times we start digging through that and thinking which ones we like the best, which ones are the coolest songs, and like I said before, always willing to rework them.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's really fascinating. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned some of the guys you've written with, which is part of that legacy, part of that list. And you mentioned the Wikipedia, yeah, which I've looked at before, and yeah, that it's amazing the number of members that have
Oh
been
my.
in that band. It is wild. I mean, that legacy. It's long. It's a
It's
long
pretty
list.
cool. I remember Jody Mathis back 10 years ago or so, when he was briefly in the band, said, what, you've never been in the Burrito Brothers? Where have you been? Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's long. Another thing that's mind-boggling to me is I'm like about third or no more than fourth now on that list of longevity.
Oh
But
yeah.
of course, most of them didn't last that long. Sneaky Pete is easily first. He
Yeah.
shows up more years than anybody, hands down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild to think that, yeah, that legacy. I mean, I already said this, but it's wild to think that there's this, you know, 50 plus year legacy of, and it really starts with Graham Parsons, and
Yeah.
he was only on 2 albums.
Right. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
And he was fine with it carrying on. I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
that when he was asked about Rick Roberts bringing that group of Country Gazette guys to Europe and playing tour dates and then putting out an album, and it was called the Flying Burrito Brothers, and they did that repertoire. Of course, also new songs of theirs, and Graham was asked about that by Chuck Cassell in an interview, and surprisingly, Graham thought it was great. He said, "The idea will keep going whether I do it or anybody else." He's just glad that it was still going. It's got to keep going, he said, which actually, now that I've been in it this long, resonates with me in a whole new way. At first, I felt like it was our armor, it was our legitimizing factor that Graham himself liked the idea of the group going on, and we're that. And so there you go. And I believe we're doing it justice. We care. And now I've been in it long enough, and I'm, turning into an old man, that I think I sure hope it doesn't die with me. It's got to keep going, whether I'm in it or anybody else.
Well, yeah, hopefully hopefully that will continue. Hopefully there'll be some younger cats that'll, take the mantle and continue to.
It would certainly get my blessing. It certainly wouldn't be any sort of no, don't do that, it's sacred or something.
Yeah, all right.
It's funny that we were up against, I'm so happy that I haven't really heard that in a long time, but I remember the first few years, the thrust of the older curmudgeonly, one friend of mine called them the haters, saying, "You're not the Burrito Brothers. What business do you have calling yourself the Burrito Brothers?" And I thought, Bob Boiling wisely advised me not to engage in that, just sidestep. Because my tendencies was to say, "Oh yeah, well, you can look it up. We're trademarked. We got albums out, and you look at the history, and we came along organically. It wasn't some bunch of guys who suddenly decided to call themselves that.
Yeah,
it happened gradually over time, and my biggest answer would have been, okay, if we're not, who's your definitive?" I know they start with Graham Parsons, but it gets a little foggy after naming him. I think I don't mean to make light of Chris Hillman's input.
Yeah.
He belongs at the top of that Mount Rushmore of burritos, but kind of after that, it gets a little foggy. I suppose Sneaky Pete. But if you're insisting that that's the real group, then you no longer have it by the third album.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it ended. It's like,
yeah,
because then from whatever, Graham was fired, right?
Yeah, essentially.
It's
weird. It seems kind of like passive aggressive behavior. I think he kind of wanted out and was acting up to get fired, sort of.
Yeah, and I know his heroin addiction had become problematic, and it is interesting. Yeah, and you and I had chatted about this before too, which I find funny too. Is this kind of like you said, these curmudgeons that are upset with with the name and whatever, and it's like, well, Graham Parsons stole the name in the first place.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. And like I say, it was the first group of non-original Flying Burrito Brothers. Was, well, actually, what you just said, you could say the first group was the non-original, but then in 73, which is only what, four years later, they've got a group that has none of the originals, and it's out there, but it's good. I don't believe there ever was a version that wasn't good. That group has got a new album coming out.
Really?
Yeah, it's recorded in 1973, or is it 72? It's coming out in just, what is it, the 13th? It's 1 week for Record Store Day.
Oh, I did not know that.
Took that recording that was released as an album in Europe back in 1973, headed up by Rick Roberts with the Country Gazette guys and Eric Dalton on drums. And it's coming out as the Flying Burrito Brothers live in Europe on Record Store Day in 1 week, which is rather interesting. And I'll get a copy. I know I want one.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't know that. Yeah, thanks for letting me. I might have to grab a copy myself. That's really cool. I did not know that. I wanted to ask. I was curious with the talking about all these older members. And have you received any feedback from any past members about the current band
Oh yeah.
albums?
Oh yeah. Well, it seems to be reserved and nice. It's not. We've never gotten any sort of glowing reviews of "I think you guys are wonderful. I'm so glad you're carrying on" or anything like. But they're also not rejecting us. Like I've corresponded quite a bit with Rick Roberts, a lot of times on Facebook,
Hmm.
and he's fully aware of us and does not has never said anything negative or acting as if it bothers him or he thinks it's wrong. Actually, I could see why in light of mentioning he's the guy who did just that all those years ago,
Yeah, yeah.
but and then Al Perkins has been a really good friend. He's
Nice.
played on recordings I've done, and he's always just gracious and friendly as he could be, and tells stories about Graham and things. And then probably the most key example of interaction with one of those, with the earliest guys, would be that Chris Hillman was aware when I was getting the trademark rights.
Hmm.
He had filed for the Flying Burrito Brothers trademark rights, and I was doing that too. And he got in touch and said, I really wish you'd leave that alone. Basically, he was saying that he was aware that somebody's going to keep doing it. Somebody's been doing it, so they're going to keep doing it. I think he kind of reluctantly felt he couldn't stop it. And I don't think he had any big objection to it, but he asked graciously that he would like to hold the logo for the Flying Burrito Brothers. And in his case, it's a logo. It's like to put out some. They've done a little of it to put out some archival things, old recordings from when he was in it, and all that, and sell T-shirts or whatever, swag, whatever you call it, and own the rights to Flying Burrito Brothers in that way. But interestingly, it didn't stop us from getting it. Didn't stop me from acquiring it, because the trademarks are specific, and he was not willing to be an currently existing working band, and his was defined differently. And he said, would you please just leave out the word flying? That'll sort of signify my ownership. When it's the Flying Burrito Brothers, it's my baby, and you guys can be the Burrito Brothers. And we didn't mind that at all, and of course we wanted to honor Chris Hillman's request.
Yeah.
And the truth is, the Flying Burrito Brothers moved to Nashville in 1980 with a new label deal with Curb Records. In fact, that's when I alluded to when they were kind of working at making the country charts. And they shortened the name. The label wanted them to just call it the Burrito Brothers. And we tend to identify that since we're from Nashville, we've been based in Nashville. The group has, the entire time I've been in it, and a long time before, essentially since the 80s, except for a few little blips where another version of the band showed up in LA. But so we tend to say the easy line that they shortened the name to the Burrito Brothers when they moved to Nashville in 1980. If you dig into the history real deeply, you find that's not completely true. There's years that they went back to calling themselves Flying Burrito Brothers for a year or so, but it's a good way to put it, and it identifies us as well because of the trademark situation and honoring Chris Hillman's request. And I've come to just love it. I think I really like that being the name. It just rolls off the tongue. It starts with a B, like the Beatles, the Beach Boys, the Byrds, the band. It's that good, the Bee Gees. It's got that great B, which is in fact when the Byrds started, they said they wanted their band name that started with B because of the Beatles and the Beach Boys. I've heard other examples of that, like when Adrian Belew named the Bears, it was because he wanted the group when catalog to show up close to the Beatles.
Nice.
So I love I love the name the Burrito Brothers. I don't
Oh
think
yeah.
we need flying attached to it. And in fact, if it became available down the road, I don't think we need to. I think
Yeah.
we're more we've we've been the Burrito Brothers for a long time now, and we don't need
Yeah,
to
it fits.
change that title, you
Yeah, I
know?
think it fits you guys perfectly.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
good. So do you guys have any live shows coming up? Do you have anything in the works right now?
We don't right now. Well, I'm gonna do a gig in 1 week with the Long Players where
Hmm.
they get guys like me, guys from bands who, you know, the front guy of different bands, and it's headed up by Bill Lloyd, who you might have heard of, Foster and Lloyd.
Oh yeah.
He's that guy, and Steve Allen has been his partner in it, and so there's a connection because Steve's in with us,
Yeah.
and they just find a whole bunch of illustrious, cool people to join them on any given show, and their presentation is to take a classic album from the golden years and play it from start to finish with a different singer being brought out for each song.
Oh, nice.
It's really neat. Although this time is a what was it 25th anniversary of them doing it. This group's been doing this for quite a while, and they've just invited roughly everybody who's done that with them in the past to come in and sing a song. I'm going to sing Roadhouse Blues. It'll
Oh, great.
be a
I love that
blast.
song. That's one of my
Yeah,
favorite all-time favorite songs. Oh, that's
yeah,
that's really cool. That's really cool. I love that. Um, and I know you guys have done lots of live gigs in the past, as you know, the Burrito Brothers. Do
yeah,
you how do you, with I mean, obviously you've got your catalog of songs, you've got 5 albums. And then there's this vast catalog of, Burrito Brothers
yeah, yeah.
songs from 50 years. Do you play a lot from the past? Do you kind of focus more on what your material, or are there certain like fan favorites that you go, okay, we kind of have to play this, or are there certain favorites of yours?
I think
Well,
so. Yeah, I think we're really, I love the idea of regarding us as a current, vital, really still creative and artistic band, and we therefore want to present that. Um, I can think of lots of examples through history where a whole new incarnation of a band started having their own vibe, and when they played concerts only did that. Like Fleetwood Mac pops into mind. They
yeah,
did very little of the Peter Green material. I'm sure they did it first,
yeah.
but even the Bob Welch. Once they got Buckingham and Nix in, it was a whole new ball game, and we don't want to go that far. We don't. We want to, maybe half and half probably
Sure.
would be the nice idea, that we feel a desire to do our material from our recent albums, but there's some really cool stuff. And if you're the Burrito Brothers, you got to give the audience who's coming to see you some of those great classic songs. I mean,
Yeah,
golly, Gilded Palace of Sin is filled with them.
yeah.
We were asked, and very flattered to be asked, to play in 2019, the 50th anniversary of the Gilded Palace of Sin, and
Oh, wow.
play the album from start to finish. And I kind of stole the Long Players idea and got different alumni to come in and sing different songs on it.
Oh,
And we
nice.
put together it's not a studio quality recording, but it's not a bad recording. And I put it on a CD, and you can get that at our website. And it's the recent edition of Burrito Brothers playing the classic album. And man, the first few songs on there are just classics, like Devil in Disguise and Sin City. And I think Wheels is one of people's very favorite songs.
Yeah.
And Wild Horses is super beloved. And they
Oh,
did that
yeah.
because of their friendship, Graham's friendship with Keith Richard. They did it before the Stones.
Yeah, yeah. I always thought that was a funny story. Yeah, when
Yeah,
they released it before the Stones released it. Because
yeah.
I remember hearing an interview with Keith Richards, and I think Mick Jagger had called him up. He's like, "What the hell, man? Like that's our song." He's like, "What?
But
Did you give
Doc,
it to Graham?" Like, yeah, I told him we could record it. Like,
does a great version of it. I
yeah, oh
love
yeah,
it.
it's
Oh, I love it.
fantastic.
And
I
then there's
might
one.
like. I might like that version more than the Stone. And I love the Stones, but I think I might like that version more in some ways.
I'm with you on that. I love the Stones too, but yeah, I really love that. And and then that third album where Rick Roberts comes into the picture, he did that beautiful song Colorado, and
Mm.
there's other things there, and there's one that might be a deep dive. It might not be familiar to most people that I just adored. It was in the group when they reconstituted in the mid 70s. On the album called Flying Again. And Joel Scott Hill was the lead singer, and the writer was Gene Parson, not Graham, but Gene Parson. It was called Wind and Rain, and it's just splendid song. I love that one. There's good ones to pick
Yeah.
from the years back.
I would imagine when you're putting a set list together, it's got to be difficult. I mean, one, just your own, music, you've got a lot to, I mean,
Yeah,
and of course, if you're going to do a show, currently you're probably going to do a lot of the new material, you'll probably focus more on the new
like
album,
to, yeah.
which is great, I'm sure. And I was curious about that too, because, like I said, I really love the new album Together. And I was curious, like, do you have a favorite track on the song,
I do.
both to listen to and also to play? And maybe those are different, that might not be you know,
Ah, it
mutually
could be two
exclusive.
different things. It could be two different things. It's weird. For the first time on this album, I answer that question with yes, I do have a favorite song. Usually and it's true even in this case that I always think of it as a whole piece. The album is designed to be an album. It's not
Yeah.
10 random songs coupled together. It's all cohesively paced and meant to be an album.
Yeah.
And but in this case, the second to last song, "I Live for Loving You," is an idea that just really was strong in my heart and soul. It was I've dreamed of possibly writing as a songwriter, writing a classic standard for the ages, the kind of song that any really good singer can, the kind of songs Frank Sinatra sang,
Mm.
or Eva Cassidy sang so beautifully. Just the idea of a standard kind of thing. I wish it would be in a movie. It was written with that desire in mind. I don't know if I'll see that ever come to fruition. We seem to stay less recognized than I wish we were. And I hope that stuff like what you and I are doing right here helps that. But
Too.
it was just meant to be a fine, soulful, tuneful song that isn't a real sort of genre stylized. It's just I hope, standard type approach, and so therefore I've got high hopes for it. I'm also very grateful for what I have. I'm lucky to be in this position I'm in. I'm lucky to get to play with the people I play with and make these albums. So I'm not going to be all upset. Well, damn it, I didn't get my standard. I'm so frustrated that people aren't noticing I live for loving you. I won't ever be that way.
Yeah.
I'm happy with what I got, but in the back of my mind, that's my dream for it, and therefore it's my favorite song on the album.
Very cool. Very cool. Do you have is it also your favorite song to play live, or
No, that's
no?
right. Yeah, the second part of your question. No, it wouldn't be probably, unless, I mean, it would be close because it means so much to me. I could really just sink my teeth into it and love every minute of getting to do it. But I think it doesn't invite quite the level of fun and excitement, that some of the up tempo. It's a gentle, like say, "How Deep Is Your Love" by the Bee Gees.
Yeah.
That makes people just sort of sway and feel good and stuff. It's not the same as like really getting down and kicking some ass. So
Yeah.
probably something like Miss Misery is more fun or even going back into the previous catalog, stuff like that first song on Gilded Palace of Sin. She's a devil in disguise. That's so good. That
Yeah.
and it's funny. like to call it that, but it's actually Christine's tune. That's the name,
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
title at the first of that album. And I think they even in later, I think that on the last of the Red Hot Burritos, they retitled it Devil in Disguise because that's the hook that's used throughout the song. And Christine was a girl they knew who they, were being pissy about and thought she was a devil. And then within a year, she died. I think it was a car wreck or something.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Illness. She died. And so it was very awkward. It's sort of like, well, gosh, that's not very respectful of the dead. It feels funny to be
Yeah.
pointing a nasty finger at someone named Christine who passed like that. So I tend to just think of it as devil in disguise about just anybody, which brings to mind, I've been asked, was Ms. Misery anybody in particular?
Oh, yeah.
And my answer, to be honest, is yes, but I prefer not to go there because it takes two to tango. I was probably just as full of myself and thinking that she was so bad not to love me or something. I don't know. I don't want to dig up anything or point any fingers.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not going to do the Taylor Swift.
Well, that was a long time ago too. Remember, I said I wrote that with Bob at least 15 years ago.
Yeah,
More
yeah.
than that, I think. No, wait, 20. Excuse me. I don't have a drink handy.
Um, I know it's getting late where you are. I don't want to keep you all night, but I do have a few more questions if
Okay, yeah.
your game. One I was curious about, and this might be kind of a loaded question, but maybe not loaded, just maybe a longer, maybe a long answer. But I was hoping we could maybe take a ride in the Wayback Machine, like
Mhm.
Mr. Peabody's Wayback Machine, and
Oh, yeah.
uh, I was curious about your start in music. Did you come from a musical family? Kind of what was the impetus for you? Where did that all start?
Yeah, I come from a very musical family. My dad played trumpet in jazz bands,
Hmm.
and he was really good. His approach was the really good guys. Like Miles Davis was probably top of the mountain for him, and John Coltrane, and then he got even far out into things like Art Ensemble of Chicago and Sun Ra, and just really hipster, cool dad who
Yeah.
uh, encouraged music. Encouraged might not even quite be the right word. It was just that it was always around us. So it just seemed kind of like something you could do. And I have three brothers. All of them are musicians. All of them are real good musicians. And uh, two other ones, like I already mentioned, my older brother Fred, my younger brother David he's essentially retired now, but he had a good career. Uh, he led a group called Fish Heads and Rice that made a number of albums.
Hmm.
Gary Talley was in that group, the guy from the Box Tops, and a lot of music in my upbringing. And so we sort of just grew up thinking, oh, it's just something you do. You mean you didn't have a bunch of black jazz guys come over to your house? and and uh, once I got started, well, I went to college. So it was after getting out of college sometime in around the late 70s, 78 or so. Uh, I hooked up with my brother Fred, and then it wasn't long before we brought little brother David in, and we chased the dream as the James Brothers, and even got a single out produced by John Loudermilk in Nashville. I've got somewhere in my stuff the page from Billboard magazine where we were one of the pick single of the week, although it didn't pan out, and that group kind of self-destructed because older brother Fred, now in hindsight, I know justifiably so to a degree, was too dominant. He was more world-wise and musically capable than his two younger brothers at that point. But both of us, David and I, were not into being told everything we were supposed to do and essentially being a backup band for our older brother. So it kind of broke apart. But then David and I continued as just a two band version of the James Brothers, wanting to be some sort of roughly a reinvention of the Everly Brothers would be the closest to describing what we were chasing. And we did that for 4 or 5 years, something like that. Some really cool people we played on the Opry, and not too much later than that, I was in a band that got a record deal in Germany on Taxum Records called Mr. Hyde. And I, in the 80s, played on the Graham Parsons Nashville tribute that an album was made from it. And it was put together by a guy named Argyle Bell, who, by the way, asked everybody in the band. He had a stage band so that solo singers could come up and have backing, and they had, prior to the show, they had during the week some rehearsals for those people to be ready to do so, but they didn't have to have whole changeovers of bands. There was a group of musicians there for everybody, and I was the keyboard player in that. And the Burrito Brothers that year were just John Beelan and Gib Gilbo, just two guys. And so they used the backup band. And lo and behold, later, I think maybe early the next year, an album came out called Wheels that was live Graham Parsons tribute featuring all these name people. And from that day on, I was able to list on my resume that I'd been in the Burrito Brothers. So, that was pretty cool. 1986 was my first entry into this band. And it resulted in, there were 5 years of these tributes. And so I was kind of hanging out. That's why, as I alluded to earlier, my brother Fred told that label that his brother Chris knew those guys, because that's kind of where I met them all, and stayed in touch and worked a lot with them. I worked many years with Bobby Bear, and I think I met Bill Lloyd there, a lot of people, and Jimmy Ibbotson of the Dirt Band, Vince Gill, Rodney Crowell. There was a lot of people, so it's just a path that I've been on for a long, long time, and I'm very appreciative of it.
That's really cool. That's great. I love the fact that your dad was so, what's the right word? I guess, inspiring in terms of, his children, and so open to and experimental with music. And I think that's.
Oh yeah, very inspiring. When I say Miles Davis, I think that's the closest to, and I don't believe he was a copycat. I just believe he grasped that Miles managed to make the trumpet, which is generally heard as a pretty harsh, almost piercing, bright sound. And Miles, more than anyone else I've heard, really softened it and made it sweet, really kind of just cool and musical. Yeah. And my dad picked up on that, and he played trumpet that wasn't harsh and piercing, and yet very, very capable. He's a soulful guy, and he liked the flugelhorn, that fatter one with the softer tone anyway. Yeah. And so I've thought the greatest gift he gave me in music was just this sense that from growing up in his house and under his influence, I always felt like I just knew how to do this. You go out in the world to want to play music, and I know how.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you too, it's like totally switching gears. I was curious, you're also a music journalist.
Yeah.
I was curious about, could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, that's what I did in college. My dad was a geologist by trade. He always that was his main career, and how he made a good bit of money. And he was just the most avid amateur musician, technically an amateur since it wasn't listed as his profession. But I'm telling you, he was always in groups and always had. So anyway, he offered all his children that he would pay for us to go to college if we wanted. And a couple of my brothers didn't care to. I mean, I think I even hedged a little because it was sort of, I really want to just play music. But somehow it just got into me. It really hit me that that's not an offer to take lightly. Now, most people don't get that. You know, you hear nowadays all this about debt forgiveness and all. I mean, and I suppose sports guys get scholarships and stuff, but you're a lucky guy if somebody's going to pay for your college.
Yeah.
And so I took him up on it and did it. And yet, being a self-taught, just from the heart, just ear musician, I didn't want to, it didn't attract me to go learn all the rigid classical, you know, theory, major in music type stuff. And I always loved journalism. So I went that route. I thought, well, that's connected enough. It's very artistic and it's appealing to me, and I feel I would be able to use it. And I have. The best example is for about 10 years here in Nashville, I think roughly starting at the turn of this millennium until the end of that first decade, I was the editor and principal writer of a local magazine called Shake Magazine.
Oh, cool.
And we put them out for free. We just put them at music stores and bars and restaurants. Anybody who'd let us leave a pile of our magazines there for anybody to pick up free. And it was paid for by acquiring ad space in it. You know, I'd go talk some music store or bar or whatever into advertising in it. And that's how we paid for the printing of it. And did that for about 10 years. It finally, my passion for it wore down when it just seemed like I never got past being the Lone Ranger. It was like, it was almost, not quite, but almost a one-man operation. I had to come up with the ad revenue. I put all those stacks of magazines in my van and schlepped it around all over the Nashville area and dropped them off. And the most, that was the hard work. The writing, I don't think I ever saw as anything but something I dug. I operated as the journalist school, you know, teachers taught me, that operate on the idea that if you think something's really interesting, then it's quite possible that gets conveyed in your writing and other people will find it interesting too. And so I'd pick subjects like the story of Danny Whitten in Crazy Horse, that tragedy, or Eva Cassidy and how she was not even known until after she died. What an interesting, different sort of story. Or getting to meet and interview Todd Rundgren or Richie Furay, or just that kind of thing was always thrilling. It was always cool. And after 10 years of it, though, it still wasn't making me any money. And so the wanting to do it because that's cool and I like, wears down a little bit. It finally just sort of was, I guess I've done this enough now. And really, it really coincides right with getting in the Burrito Brothers and thinking, well, I'd rather this was my focus now, you know.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
But 10 years of doing that is not a bad run.
That's great. That's a great run. Yeah, and especially in this time and age with the internet, it's, you know, I mean, you know, literary print, I mean, the printed literary magazine or news, I mean, it's dying, sadly.
That's true. And it really was then too. I mean, that come to think of it, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was absolutely another element. It was like, wow, the whole landscape has changed, and I'm not quite prepared to just shift that. I don't know. I think I was already turning into an older guy who didn't see things like, you know, if you're 25, it's just the world as you know it, and it's the obstacles you face in life and stuff. If you're 50 something, you're kind of, I don't need this that bad.
Yeah. I'm too old for this pain. Yeah,
which
I agree.
You know, I hope I'm still struggling with. I don't think I'm any sort of ace at online presence and social media and stuff.
Nor am I, my friend. It's a struggle for sure. It's
yeah.
Like, the only reason I even have some of my social media pages up is because my daughter told me to, and actually set them up for me. Like, Dad,
Oh, cool.
you have to be on
That
Instagram, Dad. Okay, fine.
yes, yes, yeah.
He set me up. Yeah. So yeah, exactly. That's funny.
Yes, I have some of that too with my daughter. Yes.
That is great. Well, Chris, this has been an absolute pleasure and an honor chatting with you tonight. Thank you so very much. For everybody watching, if you look in the description below, there are links to the Burrito Brothers, their website, as well as their Facebook page. If you've never heard them, definitely go check them out. If you like country rock or just good music in general, what a delightful, amazing band. The newest album together is phenomenal. And I think for all you old timers like me that are out there that love the Flying Burrito Brothers, if you have not heard Burrito Brothers, check them out. You will love this stuff. Definitely continues the legacy of Graham Parsons, but with its own new fresh twist, which is just exceptional stuff, really exceptional music. So Chris, again, thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you, Victor. I appreciate it very much. What kind words, and how sweet it was to get to talk with you tonight.
Yeah, very fun, very fun.